Looking at the external evidence, the early church fathers are unanimous that the Gospel of Matthew was written by the disciple Matthew. Mark was written by Mark, the interpreter of Peter in Rome. Luke was written by Luke, the companion of Paul. And John was written by the disciple John. Tertullian, writing around 200 AD in North Africa, tells us that the documents of the Gospels were written by the apostles Matthew and John and apostolic men of Luke and Mark. Prior to that, St. Irenaeus of Lyons tells us Matthew wrote a gospel among the Jews in their own style, while Paul and Peter were preaching in Rome. Then Mark, the disciple of Peter, handed to us the preaching of Peter. Then Luke, a follower of Paul, set forth his own gospel. Later, John, the disciple of the Lord, put out a gospel while residing in Ephesus. So Irenaeus tells us John wrote later than the other three, implying the first three were possibly written around the same time. Clement of Alexandria, writing in Egypt around the same time as Irenaeus, tells us the Gospels with the genealogies came first. Mark was done at request while Peter was preaching in Rome, and that John came last at the urging of friends. So we get the same idea that Irenaeus tells us, that the first three were written around the same time, and John came last. The Muratorian fragment, which dates to the middle of the 2nd century, is a list of an early canon. The first page was lost, however the second page starts with, "at which nevertheless he was present," and so he placed them in his narrative. The third book of the Gospel is that according to Luke, Luke the well-known physician. The fourth of the Gospels is that of John, one of the disciples, to his fellow disciples and bishops, who had been urging him to write. So we are told Luke was third, John was last, and it starts with the same idea church fathers tell us, that Mark was present while Peter was preaching in Rome and wrote down what Peter taught, although the names on the first page are lost. Preserved in Eusebius' Ecclesiastical History is a quote from Papias of Hierapolis, written before 125 AD. This too the elder used to say, Mark, who had been Peter's interpreter, wrote down carefully, but not in order, all that he remembered of the Lord's sayings and doings, for he had not heard the Lord, or had been one of his followers, but later, as I said, one of Peter's. Peter used to adapt his teachings to the occasion, without making a systematic arrangement of the Lord's sayings, so that Mark was quite justified in writing down some things just as he had remembered them. For he had had one purpose only, to leave out nothing that he had heard, and to make no misstatement about it. He also says Matthew wrote the Logia in the Hebrew dialect. To whether Papias was referring to the Gospel of Matthew, or an older list of sayings of Jesus, sometimes referred to by scholars as Q, we do not know. Tim McGrew makes an excellent point regarding all this external evidence. If you plot all four church fathers on a map, you see we have wide attestation of the authors of the Gospels from all over the ancient world. This is the kind of testimony we dream of receiving with other ancient documents. When we have multiple authors in different regions all telling us the same general story, we have excellent evidence the Gospels were written by those who they are attributed to. On top of this, we have no other tradition or testimony which attributes authorship to anyone else. There is no competing tradition. Plus, if the church fathers just made up authors to attribute to the four Gospels, why is there not unanimous attestation to who wrote Hebrews? Hebrews is truly anonymous, and church fathers had to try to guess as to who the author was. If they made up the authors of the Gospels, why not do the same with Hebrews? And also, why not give all four Gospels prominent names? Surely they could have done better than Mark and Luke, who never met Jesus and were later disciples of the apostles. If you're just making it all up, why not pick two of the other disciples? It would have made the Gospels look better instead of attributing them to men who were never considered church founders or disciples of Jesus. Some skeptics try to claim the Gospels cannot be trusted because they do not mention the authors internally, but this was how the majority of ancient biographies were written. The majority of works from the ancient world have to be externally attributed. E.P. Sanders says, "The claim of an anonymous history was higher than that of a named work. In the ancient world, an anonymous book, rather like an encyclopedia article today, implicitly claimed complete knowledge and reliability. It would have reduced the impact of the Gospel of Matthew had the author written, 'This is my version,' instead of, 'This is what Jesus said and did.' So looking at the external evidence, we have good evidence they are written by the apostles and men who they are attributed to. So the claim of later impostors is without evidence and unwarranted.